The Boca Raton Historical Society and Museum, founded in 1972, is a nonprofit membership organization dedicated to preserving the past to enrich the future. The Historical Society is building a legacy in our community by collecting and sharing our local history. The current project is documenting the Jewish history of Boca Raton.
I'm Patty Beck, and I moved to Boca Raton in 1984.
Thank you so much for joining us, Mrs. Beck, Patty Beck. It's lovely to have you. I'm Sandy Altner. I'm a volunteer interviewer with the Boca Raton Historical Society and Museum. And today is November 11th, 2015, and we are seated in the beautiful studio at Lynn University, the Communications Department. And we're here to talk about the Jewish history of Boca Raton. When you first arrived, and the year was again
1984.
1984, what was your reason for coming to Boca?
My husband and I had always loved Florida. When our children were toddlers, we came down for vacations, and we took the kids to Hawaii for a Christmas break in 1983. And although our business was based in Cincinnati, Ohio, we said, we left 14 inches of snow and 6 inches of ice under that. We could live in Florida. We were in the hotel business, and we had properties in Florida. And by the time we got back, we had decided, let's go. So that summer, right before school started, we moved to Boca Raton. We came down and looked around and have friends in Plantation. And although we decided on Boca because we were moving 7 other families down and thought it was a vibrant, booming community and growing. It brought us here because of the weather, and it kept us here because of the love.
You moved 7 other families with you?
Right. We moved part of our business, our development hotel company we had 7 properties in Florida, and we were expanding. And we just decided that if we could live there, we would. We could run the business from any place.
Did you grow up in Cincinnati, Patty?
No, I was born in Peoria, Illinois. And when I was 11, we moved to St. Louis, Missouri. And so I was there until I went away to college.
And tell me a little bit about your husband.
He is a funny, wonderful, loving, caring person who is the best father and grandfather God put on earth. He loves his kids, he loves me, and he loves work. And he's a pilot, so he flies all over.
And his name is Louis Beck.
It is, yes, it is.
So Louis was this his idea that you should be moving to Florida? Was it something that was immediately appealing to you? Or how did you react or did you decide this together? How did it come about?
When we came back from Hawaii with the kids in January of 1984, he came in, we worked in the same office, and he came into my office and said, let's move to Florida. And I said, are you kidding? And he said, I knew you wouldn't be flexible enough to do it. So 20 minutes later, I walked downstairs to his office, and I said, let's go. My parents spent 6 months down here, and I had never lived with my children, and family in the same place they were. So my kids thought we were just going on a vacation to be with Grandma and Grandpa. And they were very excited about coming to Florida.
Did you have an affiliation with the synagogue in Cincinnati when you
were
living there?
I grew up, my mother's saying was, you can't be a man without a country. So I grew up knowing always to belong to a synagogue. And I was not as active in the synagogue up there as I have been down here. But when we moved to Florida, I made my focal point the synagogue. And I have been working for the synagogue as a volunteer since 1984, and I have been on the board of trustees since 1989. So, and I have held various positions, the most recent being president for 4.5 years.
And you were the second woman to be a president?
The third.
The third.
The third woman to be a president.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about what you found in the Jewish community when you first arrived in Boca. You didn't have friends here, you had friends in Plantation, you said.
Right. We ended up moving around the corner from one of our college friends. And they had been in Boca for about a year and a half. And it was like they told us where we needed to go, and they had made their print, and we followed. And originally, we thought we would look around at synagogues, and Joyce told me, no, Beth-El is where you want to be. So I went and I interviewed Robin Eisenberg, the director of education, and fell in love with the temple, with Robin. The rabbis weren't in that day, but I knew that was the place for us. It's warm, it's inviting, and makes you feel like you're at home. And it is our second home now.
Tell me a little bit about how it is that you so quickly got swept up in volunteerism and in serving the community as you have for all these years.
Well, I was also working full-time, but I knew we had to make a new community. And we moved down here just in time for the Jewish high holidays in 1984, and fell in love over at FAU with Merle Singer. And I always say our family was Singerized. We went to services every Friday night with the kids, carrying some of them out as they were sleeping. But we really made the Jewish community our focal point. It was not the Jewish community that we have today, but it was growing. And it needed attention, and I felt I could give it my attention. But I was pushed along by Merle.
Let's talk first of all about the Jewish community that you found down here. Let's start with, what was Boca Raton in 1984 overall? Can you give us a bit of a picture of what you found when you got here?
Well, I had been told stories about the Jewish community in Boca Raton and why we did not want to live here, because it was small, it was new. Jews were not originally welcomed in Boca Raton, and we found it very different. It was smaller. Beth-El was the only Reform congregation that had a building at the time, and our oldest, our daughter, was going to be bat mitzvahed in a year and a half, and so we joined also because I wanted her bat mitzvahed in a synagogue and in a sanctuary, not in a storefront where some other congregations were starting. But we found the Jewish community, although smaller, very welcoming, very warm, and even though I was working full-time, I had time to volunteer, and I volunteered both at the kids' school and the temple, and I started slow, and you know, as you meet people, they get you involved, and you continue to be involved, and it just became part of my heart.
What needs did you see at the beginning that you felt most strongly about participating in solving?
I think it was getting the story of Temple Beth-El out. I think South Florida is notorious for a low affiliation rate. And I think we needed to let the people know that we're moving into Boca, and the people that were there and unaffiliated, what we had to offer. And we had a phenomenal rabbi, and people really didn't know what was there. So we did all kinds of programs. I was involved in programming and sisterhood, and just anywhere I could volunteer and had time, because my time I worked in our company. So if I wasn't there one afternoon, it was okay.
I want to talk to you a little bit also about the Temple Beth-El isn't just in and of itself. One of the things that distinguishes this synagogue, as has been told to me by many people, is that it's not just about the Jewish community. Temple Beth-El has a tremendous record, really, in doing a lot of things that involve interfaith, the reach into the community, and I'm thinking about the Giving Tree, which is essentially a group of Jewish people buying Christmas presents for the Christians who would otherwise not have a great Christmas. Is that pretty much how you describe it?
That's a wonderful description of it. It started 27 years ago in Myra and Merle's living room and garage. And then we moved across the driveway to an empty condo that was there, and we used the garage there to store gifts. We found a need through Wayne Barton and Barton's Boosters, it was called at the time, and we were taking on 25 families in Dixie Manor. I'm very proud of my daughter who moved down to Florida after she got married and said, Mom, how can you just give to 25 families when if I had a child that lived next door and didn't get anything? So she and a couple of her friends took on 100 homes and got volunteers to bring in gifts for every child in Dixie Manor. And we have been doing all 100 homes ever since then.
And the Giving Tree has expanded.
And
how would you describe it today?
It's everywhere. If you have a need, one phone call to anybody in the Giving Tree, and your need is hopefully fulfilled very soon. We have Susie Broad, Leslie Steinberg, I can't even mention everyone, yourself, myself, Myra Singer. Everybody's heart is with those that are less fortunate. And we have raised our children on Christmas Eve and now our grandchildren, delivering gifts and playing with the kids outside and seeing that we have to give back to the community. And it's not just the Boca Raton community, it is the greater South Florida community. There are people everywhere that are in need.
Rabbi Dan Levin, who is now the senior rabbi, of course, at Temple Beth-El, has famously said of the Giving Tree that Christmas Eve is not just about Chinese food for Jews. You have to get out and do something in the community. And what can you tell me about what this has done for the community itself, for the Jewish community, in the way of tolerance?
I think what it has done is it has made people realize that although Boca Raton has a reputation of being a very affluent community, that we do have people that are far less fortunate and they need help. And we just want to be there for whatever they need help with, whether it's clothing, housing, beds, whatever we can do. And we have 17, I believe now, agencies that we do fulfill holiday wishes for, senior communities, non-Jewish communities. It's just grown by leaps and bounds, and it's grown because we have so many wonderful volunteers that want to help, and even non-Jewish people that celebrate Christmas are there with us on Christmas Eve to deliver gifts.
When we look at the impact that Temple Beth-El has had because of the culture of Temple Beth-El, and the culture, by that I mean that it wasn't just established with the idea of this is just for Jews. Temple Beth-El, in some ways, like the Giving Tree, has become a community changer in that way. When you talked about the community that you found here and what you were told, the frightening things like, oh, this is not really a Jewish community, do you think that Temple Beth-El has had an impact then, and the culture of Temple Beth-El, on shaping the community of Boca Raton?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that every religious organization has some kind of an impact in their community, and not just the religious community, but in the community at large. But we have a saying in Hebrew, tikkun olam, repair the world. And we are trying in every way we can to help wherever we can. Our clergy, our staff, and our volunteers and congregants at Beth-El were taking supplies down in 1990 to the Hurricane Andrew unfortunate area. We were packing trucks and trucks and taking donated supplies. So it's wherever there's a need, Temple Beth-El likes to be there. We have a phenomenal social justice program that encompasses all kinds of things throughout the year.
Has that had an impact on breaking down some of the barriers, some of the ideas of what Jews are?
I think so. I think that when people come to our synagogue or meet people, I know when I started teaching in 1969, I was thought of as having horns and being mean, and that was in Cincinnati, Ohio, because I was Jewish. And that really absolutely blew my mind. But I think when you go into a community where people have never met a Jewish person, they listen to what other people say about who Jews are. Boca happens to be a very Jewish area, but we also happen to be an area of need in places. And although my focal point has always been the temple, I've been involved in a lot of other organizations. And it is a different Boca Raton than it was 30 years ago.
Let's talk a little bit more about the Boca Raton of 30 years ago, because we're looking at some of the accomplishments and how the barriers have been broken down and so on. But how would you describe what you found here? Did you have education that you needed for your children? Did you have, like, what did you see? What did you have?
Well, we had no public elementary school in Boca Raton where we were living. So the kids either had to be bused up to Delray, or there was, where Pinecrest is now in Boca Raton on St. Andrews, there was Boca Academy. And it was a private public school, because not that I minded the kids going up to Delray, if that's where their school was, but it was an hour and a half to 2 hours on buses each day. And so we put the kids in Boca Academy, which most people in Boca did. It was a private school, but it had a fine education. And later on, it was bought by Pinecrest and is now Pinecrest Boca campus. The education has grown tremendously. We had heard, don't go to the public schools. You have to have a private education because the Florida schools are horrible. They weren't horrible. They weren't even horrible 30 years ago, but they were different than what the northern schools were. And so I think my kids got a very, very excellent education at Spanish River. And I think our whole educational process has expanded and increased and become an excellent school system. We needed religious education for our kids because we had an 8-year-old, a 9.5-year-old, and an 11-year-old. And the education at Temple Beth-El was far and above anything we had seen in the northern congregations. And we were thrilled, and thrilled with the way our kids related to their Jewish education.
Can we talk a little bit about how the educational component of Temple Beth-El came to exist? We were fortunate to have Shirley Enselberg in to tell us some of the story. What can you tell me about why having a school was important to Temple Beth-El?
When Merle Singer came, Robin Eisenberg was hired shortly thereafter, and Robin has been our educator at Temple for 30 some odd years. And the Jewish education was very important because it was the only place you could get it. And so I think Merle and Robin worked together. It was a smaller congregation. We have 1,450 families now. And we have staff for the educational end. We also have a school out in West Boca. Our preschool and religious school is out there also, seeing the need in the late 90s that we move west. But I think the education of Jews gives you an education of all religions. And I think it's made us more tolerant. I think it has given us, as parents, a much different look at other religions, because the community encompasses all kinds of religious facilities. I think the most important class I took as a confirmand was my comparative religions class. And I think it's so important to teach everyone, not just the kids, of all the religions, and be more tolerant to what else we have here in Boca Raton besides Temple Beth-El and Judaism.
Was Boca Raton, at the time when you moved here in 1984, a very Jewish community at that time?
Not at all. All I had heard was it's very anti-Semitic. There were places where you could move. There were places where Jews couldn't move. It was not a very welcoming feeling, but it's grown, and I don't know of any place anymore that says no Jews.
Where did people come from who were down here? The people that you came into contact with in the school parking lot and so on, Were they mostly people who had been born in Florida, or did they come from different parts of the country? Can you describe any of that?
I would describe it as a melting pot. They were from all over. I don't think I met my first Florida-born person until we had been here 3 or 4 years. But they had come mostly from the East Coast, and second was the Midwest. Not very many people from the South, West, or West. But it was truly a melting pot, and people were coming here needing friendships, needing surrogate families because their families didn't live here. So you became really, really close friends with people who didn't have families. And on the Jewish holidays and the secular holidays, we would all get together and everybody would be family.
Did you have a difficult time getting the goods you needed in '84 for high holy days and things like that?
We didn't, because we left the community and went to other communities that had the kosher restaurants and kosher meat markets, and we could get, if you kept kosher, we could get that. Soon after we moved here, there were kosher markets that opened up and things, and at one time, Boca Raton was the fastest growing Orthodox community in the nation. And I think that we have all sects here. My grandchildren go to Donna Klein, where they're learning and being educated with Orthodox, conservative, and Reform Jews. And it shows them that it's not just Jews. These are people, and they're their classmates. And they might all believe certain things, and others believe different things. But it's made them even more tolerant. And not that kids are intolerant, kids are kids. And I think kids learn from their parents, but it's such a warm community at Donna Klein that they really do embrace the Judaism there too.
How would you describe the changes, the overall change you've seen in those years, that from when you first arrived with Louis and your young family to today in 2015?
I think the biggest change is the way the Jews are welcomed in Boca Raton now. It was not a welcoming feeling. It was at the temple, but certainly not in the community. Our friends happen to be both Jewish and non-Jewish friends. And friends are friends. If they're your friends, they accept you. But we have encountered, in the beginning, very anti-Semitic feelings from people.
How so?
Not being welcome, not being included in things, not welcoming our children to birthday parties and things like that if they were non-Jews. It didn't take long, though. I mean, it was just 5 or 6 years, and the Jews started moving into Boca and moving up from some of the southern communities in Florida. And even though I'm not sure of the percentage of Jews in Boca right now, the percentage of affiliated Jews in South Florida is only 12.5%. So there's an enormous amount of Jewish population that is not affiliated with a synagogue, but they're here and they're welcoming and they're glad that they were welcomed here.
Do you think there is still the feeling of anti-Semitism?
I think in some ways there is. I don't know that somebody would say, you can't come into my restaurant, but I think that there are feelings, and it's hard to describe feelings, but when you go someplace and people know you are Jewish and it's not a Jewish event, it might be an uncomfortable feeling. I mean, for me, no. I feel comfortable wherever I go. And I'm very proud of my Judaism. And I make it known if I'm someplace where there aren't a lot of Jews, that I am Jewish.
The Jewish community has changed too, in that it's not just American Jews who are now coming to Boca Raton. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's correct. There is a lot of Israeli Jews that have moved into Boca. And I think that Boca happens to be, at this time, 2015, a much more welcoming community to Jews than it ever was. and I think it's only getting better.
What are your thoughts then, Patty, on why it is that Jews gravitated to Boca Raton over the years?
Well, I can, from personal experience, it was new, it was exciting, it was young. The average age in Boca Raton was 42 years old, and I was 37 when I moved here. It was vibrant. It was a vibrant community, whether it be, take away the temple, just waking up and seeing the vibrance of green and colors, and people wanted to look nice, people wanted to feel good, and being outside felt wonderful. And you could be outside all year long. You could do activities, you could exercise, you could drive around with the top down all year long. It was a fun community. It was a great place to raise kids, but you had to just work harder because there was so much affluence around, and a lot of crazies, but we kept a real close eye on our kids, and I think we've raised wonderful kids and grandchildren, and they've been raised in this community. I think it's much more of a bedroom community than it was when we moved down here, and the activities were everywhere. You know, the kids could play soccer, they could play t-ball, they could swim, they could do everything. So I love, you know, I'm a Florida advocate. I love living in Florida because to me, it's year-round outside.
How important was it then for, I'm thinking about the gathering momentum of migration of Jews. So in the early days, in the 50s, there were hardly any Jewish people here. Even in the 70s, there were handfuls of people, and it was only then that it was necessary to really start to organize synagogues and so on. Mm-hmm. But when you look at, can you give me a sense of what you think about, like, when did it hit that momentum that it became a real draw?
I think it was the late 80s, early 90s. I think communities were changing in South Florida, and as we always see, you know, people moving up, and now going to Delray, Boynton, Palm Beach. I think that was the migration. I think it was very enticing to Northerners, and we had a lot of melting pot families coming in and becoming part of the community, and if they weren't Jewish, they found their place. If they were Jewish, we found their place for them.
Why was Boca so important to the Jews then? What happened?
Because it was, in my estimation, we weren't welcome, and we were going to show Boca Raton that we were nice people and we could enhance the community. And I think we did with all kinds of people, doctors, lawyers, clergy, volunteers. You know, we were just a caring people, and we brought our caring and our hearts into Boca Raton, and it's our community, so we wanted to make it better. And it wasn't just the Jews, it was a caliber of people that came into Boca Raton that wanted to, that made it their community. And
at a certain point then, the issues went away that you had felt as a young mother with children, that in concerns about anti-Semitism and that resistance that you felt. So at a certain point then, it just became attractive for Jewish people to come because they knew they would be welcome. Am I characterizing?
Absolutely. Absolutely. When I grew up in Peoria, Illinois, I was the only Jewish student in my school, and I really felt ostracized. Coming down here, my kids never felt that feeling, and my grandchildren never felt that feeling. It's a very lonely feeling, and I think it needs to be a mixed community, but everybody needs to be welcomed.
Do you think we've achieved that?
I think 90% we've achieved that. There's always room for more. There's always room to work and work harder and find other people that need help, and when somebody new comes into the community, welcoming them and helping them find their place.
I'd like to talk a little bit about the very central part of the business atmosphere and how that has shaped Boca Raton and brought, in fact, perhaps Jewish families that are looking to move or looking to move south would certainly have opportunity as one of the criteria. What was the business atmosphere like at the time when you and Louis moved here?
Well, moved our a part of our company here, so we found that there were smaller businesses. Other businesses moved into the community. IBM moved in and out. It was some of the businesses are still here. I think that Boca Raton, South Florida, is enticing to businesses to move here, but it's a difficult process when you're moving hundreds of families into a community, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But I think the business community has increased threefold since we got here.
Right. Now, with that, like when we look at the changes in the community from the growth of professional services available, I mean, I think that when we look at what we have available in our community in the professions and how Jews with very high educations and very strong expertise in a variety of areas, from either the healthcare field through business, through all of that. Can you talk a little bit about that and why and what you see as a change from even just 30 years ago?
Well, I think that it has blossomed. I think we needed it, and the people wanted to bring in corporations, finer medical staff. I mean, we have in all of our medical facilities here one of the if not the best breast cancer facilities that in the country, and I think it's because the people want it and they're willing to pay for it and they're willing to bring in the top people if they can. When we first moved here, everybody said to us, if you get sick, the first thing you do is get a ticket out of there. And I think that has totally changed, depending on what illness you have. I think as far as the legal field, we have top-notch legal facilities. All businesses, even retail, there are opportunities for all different areas. And I certainly am one that to say I love it. It's a difficult place to raise children. It's a great place to live, but you have to keep your feet flat on the ground and your head not up in the clouds. It's still that community that shows a great deal of affluence and craziness.
And is that the reason why, when you talk about the challenges of raising children, what would you identify as the chief part of that?
I think it's the affluence. I think it's, I want this because so and so has this, and you can't fall prey to that. The normal thing at 16 is to get a brand new car. That's not the way we raised our children, and it is important that they feel part of the community, but they don't have to feel that they're leading the community.
So obviously this is a community where there is great business opportunity and continues to be. Would you say that?
Absolutely, absolutely, for all fields, except maybe the snow industry.
When we look at the opportunities for our children, we have such an opportunity here for people to get a solid education, a solid start through the variety of schools that are here. The impact I think that the Jewish community clearly has had on the public schools as well, with the demand of Jewish parents looking for better education. Would you agree that that's something that matters?
Absolutely. Education is first and foremost in I want to say in Jewish minds, but probably in all minds. They want the best education for their children because they know that in job searching, it's no longer an undergraduate degree, masters and PhDs, and in order to be in the running, you have to have higher education, and we have the facilities here to do it.
And with that too comes an opportunity for kids to then go on from the Spanish River High School and the Donna Klein School and all the other tremendous schools that we have here to other schools in the nation as they go into their university studies and college and a variety of places. Are you concerned at all about the fact that kids are going to go up and out and not come back?
It concerned me and my own family, although I have 2 out of my 3 kids back and my other son lives in Israel. So it wasn't the United States that took him away from Boca Raton. There are a lot of people that I know whose kids did go out and never came back, but just as many went out, got an education, and have come back as doctors and lawyers and business people, entrepreneurs. It does offer a great deal.
So it's not a question of just, you're not worried that we're going to lose the population in general because people will come back.
They will. They will.
Who are the new people that are coming now, do you think?
Well, of course, it's always the retired people. We always have a great influx of retired people. But people are retiring younger, and they're looking for a vibrant community, and Boca certainly has that. And I find that there are young families. I mean, our preschool for the temple has grown so much in the 6 years that it's been around. So there definitely was a need for that. And we have, most families are 2 working parents. So they're looking for pre-care, infant daycare and preschool and aftercare. So I think we're getting a lot of young families moving in, either through corporations or settling back here because this is where they grew up. But I think Boca is certainly not on a decline.
When we look at all of these changes then, and to see how this community has been shaped, what would you say has been the impact then on what Boca is today as an entirety, and how it's been shaped by the Jewish community, by individual Jews coming and bringing business and bringing their desire for education and so on? How would you describe it?
I think Boca has become a much more intellectual area because we want it. It was not. I mean, it was the joke when we moved here, that you got your culture at Town Center Mall. But I find that many organizations are bringing in wonderful speakers and highly educated people to run their programs. I think that Boca Raton has become a much more tolerant area, and it still has the sunshine. So, sunshine breeds people that just want to play. But I have found that we've educated our kids beautifully here and our grandchildren, and I think it is a thriving community, as I didn't feel the same kind of thriving community when I first moved here.
A large part of that, I think, has to do with philanthropy, and we haven't really talked about that. You and Louis and your family have been very involved. The Beck Family Campus, which we have just talked about, was the preschool for Temple Beth-El, and many, many, many other things that you've been involved with, as have so many other families in South Florida, and particularly Jewish philanthropy. What impact has that availability of funds had to changing our community?
I think the fact that with philanthropic people, and not just Jewish philanthropic people, it has brought it has made our medical institutions have the opportunity to expand and bring in new equipment and more updated equipment. I think in our educational programs with philanthropy to the private schools and so forth, even in the public schools, making more available for our children. We do have a very philanthropic community, but we see that there's always the need. There is always the need for something more, and hopefully this next generation will be as philanthropic to make it for their children. Somebody did it for us and gave us the opportunities to educate and keep our children well here. So we want to do it for our next generation, and hopefully they will do it for the next.
Patty, in 1984, when you trekked all the way across this country with the unknown before you, as you look back on those times, what are you most pleased with having brought your family to Boca?
I think I'm pleased mostly with the people that we've met that have given our children the values and the goals in life that they have, not just from us, but from seeing other families that have grown up with them. And most of all, my family in particular is a very close family, and it's been my goal in life to keep my family together, not necessarily geographically, but caring about each other. And I think that they have made lifelong relationships and friendships with people that they grew up with down here. So it has been my dream to teach my children what philanthropy is and that the need to give back. And I think I have that in all three of my children, and now my grandchildren too.
I have one last question for you. When you look at all that has happened over 30 some years since you've first moved down here with Lewis and your family, and you look to the future, can you give me an idea of what your expectations are as Boca goes forward? What are the things that you would be most proud of seeing happen here, most pleased with?
I would love to see, continued advancement in medical facilities and the opportunity not to have to leave the community to get the best care. Businesses, I think, need to flourish. As far as religion, more tolerance from all religions, but Judaism especially. My passion is to perpetuate Reform Judaism here in Boca Raton in South Florida, and I put my heart and soul into it. I think that there are a lot of people, you put your heart and soul into it, and I think everybody that feels that commitment to Reform Judaism works together. And I find some of the interfaith programs that we do enlighten and make people grow so much more and make it a peaceful Boca Raton. That's my wish, that everybody can live in peace.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Patty Beck. And we wish you every
Thank
success.
you.
And with those grandchildren,
Thank
and
you
your
very
wonderful
much.
family, thank you for coming.
Thank you.